But you do not have a right to demean this institution, to bastardize the impeachment clause of the Constitution, to belittle the standard of constitutional impeachment to such a degree.
The articles of impeachment specify 7 separate statutory commands by the Congress that Secretary Mayorkas has similarly flouted and brazenly disobeyed. And I ask the question, if someone wants to take it up, if the Congress does not impeach, what indeed is the remedy?
This is nothing more than a political stunt on an issue that requires a serious policy solution. Building a wall with taxpayer dollars is not a serious policy solution. Closing our borders in an attempt to ensure no immigrants seeking asylum comes in is not a serious policy solution. Starving our Border Patrol personnel of resources they need to protect the homeland is not a serious policy solution. We should come together and find reasonable, humane, and equitable proposals to address this complex issue and put forth a serious policy solution that upholds our values as a country and a society. Instead, we have Chairman Green and Marjorie Taylor Greene and the other members on the majority seem to believe impeaching Senator Mayorkas.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Is an action that will fix the issue.
The gentleman is not recognized.
at the
I now
southern border.
recognize Mr. Gonzalez for his 5 minutes of discussion.
I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. And, one of the best things about Congress is we all represent districts from across the country and we have debate. And I think that's very positive. One of the most difficult things about Congress is it's filled with nothing but lawyers, and they'll talk all day about this, that, or the other, which is, I think, frustrating to many Americans. This is what's going to happen. The House of Representatives is going to impeach Secretary Mayorkas, and there is absolutely nothing anyone can do to stop it. That's going to happen. In my district in Texas, we're feeling this. In Arizona, they're feeling it. In California, they're feeling it. There is not one district in America that is not impacted by this border crisis. So I would like to focus on what happens next. What are we going to do after that? What are we going to do? Are we going to have a conversation on how we secure the border? Are we going to continue to blame others for everything that's wrong? I would like to see this border secure in a manner that protects everybody. And I do think there's an opportunity to do that. And I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to come up with a conclusion that makes America on the track of keeping people safe and secure. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I don't have anybody else in the queue. Is there anyone else who would like to? Mr. Thanadar, have you had? I don't think you have had 5 minutes yet, have you? Okay, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to discuss the ANS.
Thank you, Chairman Green, and I would yield my time to the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Tadadar. Funny that members of Congress would want to focus on the law, given that our job is to write the laws, interpret the Constitution, and implement and pass laws. Crazy to have so many lawyers here when we're dealing with laws every day. And unfortunately, what we don't have is anyone on the other side of the aisle that seems to understand what a high crime and misdemeanor is. Now, I know that's part of the law, so you don't want to talk about it, but it is the requirement for impeachment. Now, we agree on a lot of things that have been said today, as surprising as that may be. The situation at the border is untenable. Migration patterns have dramatically changed over the last 5 years. It started in the middle of President Trump's administration as migrants were coming more and more to the border. Not every single person who came over the border without documents was deported under the previous administration. And in fact, that has never happened. So if you are going to impeach Secretary Mayorkas because you say that he fails to adhere to the letter of the law under operational control, then you better impeach every single Secretary of Homeland Security that was during the past 5 administrations and will be going forward, because it's an impossible standard with the resources that they have. We have not increased the resources that the Department of Homeland Security needs to actually stop every single person from coming over the border. So I hear a lot of other things about different ways. I'm sorry, Mr. Pfluger, but you did not yield to me, so I will continue. I will mention one thing, though, you say, Mr. Pfluger. You mentioned the horrific story of 53 people who died effectively by heat and suffocation south of San Antonio, which is absolutely horrible. And if you had evidence that Secretary Mayorkas was working with the driver of that truck who abandoned them and left them there, then you would definitely have good evidence of an impeachable offense. But the notion that you would say that the cabinet secretary who oversees 260,000 employees is somehow willfully and intentionally responsible for that single incident is preposterous. Secretary Mayorkas has not disregarded any court order. Not one. Not one. Certainly he wasn't ordered to return the Remain in Mexico policy, as one of my colleagues said. He has not defied any court order. You have gone to the courts to try to prevent him from doing his job. That is true. And there have been judges who have entered preliminary orders in support of you. Those have been stayed. So he has adhered to the law in every single way that he's been required to do. Ultimately, as Mr. McCall said at the very beginning, what you are upset about is that Secretary Mayorkas rescinded prior executive orders that were working. And you have a right to be upset about that. And you have a right to talk about that. And you have a right to express your dissatisfaction in any way you choose. And you have a right to make that case to the American people so that they vote Secretary Mayorkas and this president out of office in November if that's ultimately what the people believe. But you do not have a right to demean this institution, to bastardize the impeachment clause of the Constitution, to belittle the standard of constitutional impeachment to such a degree that you can't even produce a legal memo in support of your articles of impeachment that do not exist in history and do not exist in the law. And if, in fact, as you allege here, there were false statements made to Congress or obstruction of Congress, those are crimes. You could have charged him with those, but you didn't want to because you knew you couldn't actually prove them. You just want to make the allegations and concoct some crazy breach of public trust, which does not exist.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Tanadar, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes to discuss the ANS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to have the opportunity to take issue with the gentleman from New York. But before I do, on the foundations of impeachment and why it's appropriate in this case, I think I ought to talk about what the news is, because there's not much news about these articles of impeachment. We've been moving toward this process with great deliberation and in open. This committee has, on the leadership of Chairman Green, for months. It's not a surprise to anyone. Let me tell you what the news is. The news is that Mr. Goldman just said that the situation at the border is untenable. The news is that on January 20th, the President of the United States, when asked by White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich if the U.S.-Mexico border is secure, he said, "No, it's not." He said, "I haven't believed that for the last 10 years, and I've said it for the last 10 years. Well, as we hear many members on the other side hold forth about supposed hypocrisy over here, I got to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. We've been saying the same thing this entire administration from the beginning, from January 2021. when the president disposed of multiple policies at the border that had been the most successful in history for containing illegal immigration, rejected them wholesale. And ever since, members of this committee on the other side have been trumpeting how successful this has been. It's been great. There's not a problem at the border. Chairman Green has materials released that, and if you count them up, 32 statements by the Secretary of Homeland Security asserting that the border is secure and that we have operational control of the border. A couple of examples. March 2021, I want to repeat my assurance to our audience this morning that the border is in fact secure. September 2021, Senator Ron Johnson, you have repeatedly stated that our borders are not open, they are closed. Do you honestly believe that our borders are closed? Mayorkas, Senator, I do, and let me speak to that. In July 2022, to ABC's Martha Raddatz, just a simple question, do you think it's working? Mayorkas, I think we are doing a good job. Me, November 2022, Secretary Mayorkas, do you continue to maintain that the border is secure? Mayorkas, yes. Goes on, 32 times. Until suddenly Mr. Goldman says, and others have said it here today, it's not tenable. Maybe it was because Eric Adams from New York said, you're destroying New York City. Maybe it's because the mayor of Chicago said, you got to send us more money. We're in crisis over here. Or Denver, or any of a number of other Democrat-run cities. That's the news. That's the news. This impeachment, these articles of impeachment present a very narrow question, which no one seems to want to follow the line of reasoning long enough to get to. What the Supreme Court said in United States versus Texas, both the majority and the dissent, is that Congress, 20 years ago, mandated restriction of the administration's prosecutorial authority. In certain specific cases, you will detain, and detain until you have removed. And yes, Secretary Mayorkas has brazenly flouted and disobeyed those laws, those statutable laws, statutory laws. He wrote guidelines that said it shall not be a basis to detain anyone if they're in those, just because they're in those categories that Congress declared in law. So that's what's happened over and over again. The articles of impeachment specify 7 separate statutory commands by the Congress that Secretary Mayorkas has similarly flouted and brazenly disobeyed. And I ask the question, if someone wants to take it up, if the Congress does not impeach, what indeed is the remedy?
I'd love to take it up.
I'm going to
On legislation.
I'll pose it. I've got 37 seconds, and you'll have plenty of time to address it. I'd be glad to have the colloquy. But what is the remedy? Well, Justice Alito made it clear in the dissent what the remedy is. Congress can impeach. Yes, Congress could do something else. Congress could cut off the money. But there are limits to what Congress can do. I mean, you can beg the question whether Congress has any power to restrict the discretion of the executive. The Supreme Court seems to think that it does, but it has said we are not the forum to vindicate those restrictions. That's what this process is about. It is about vindicating the rule of law in our constitutional system.
The gentleman yields. We are now up against votes. So we are going to recess until 15 minutes after the last vote. There are 2 votes.